Greetings and salutations, all you beautiful people, and welcome to another episode of Art of the Beholder, a show dedicated to all things eclectic in the world of art. I'm your host, Novo Day, and today we're going to be talking about art in film and filmmaking by focusing on the legacy of Akira Kurosawa. To hash things out and to be our guide on this journey, we're once again joined by my favorite samurai, and that is Mr. Theodore T. Buck. Welcome back to the show, Mr. Buck.
Thanks, Noah. The reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. So I'm back.
He's back. Are you
I'm
excited
back.
today, man?
I am excited.
This has been in the oven for months. We've been wanting to talk about Kurosawa for so long, and today's the day.
When I do these kind of things and you let me kind of take the reins of things, I get a little nervous because obviously
You're gonna kill it. You're gonna do fine. I'm gonna help you. I'm gonna help.
I know, but these things are very close to me, and I know you're very patient with me when I do these things because
near and dear to your heart. We know
they're near and dear to the heart, and when I like something near and dear to my heart, guess what, folks? I take forever to do it because I do so much research and I do so much diving into.
I was very impressed by your outline. It was all the research you did, all the notes you made. This is a very polished script. So just stick to the script and you'll be fine.
All right, director.
So let's dive in. Let's tell the good people why. Why are we talking about Kurosawa today?
All right. Well, folks, Akira Kurosawa. All right, he's revered amongst film buffs, but to common person who maybe follows film or enjoys it, or is maybe a little younger. He's relatively unheard of. Okay, I've talked to people that are my age or even younger, and you ask about it, and they're like, "Who?" But he's definitely in the conversation to one of the best directors who ever sat in the chair. So I'm going to give you some things, some directors, and a list of films that are all directly linked or influenced by Kurosawa.
Let's hear it. Give it to us.
All right. I'm just going to give you a few. And before you jump out of your chair and scream, you didn't list all of them. I don't have time. Okay.
We don't have time.
So we don't have time.
We only have an hour.
We only have an hour. So A Fistful of Dollars. Okay. Magnificent Seven. Those are probably the two, that are most known. Speed. Django Unchained.
I didn't know Speed. I didn't know that one. Damn.
Yes. There is a train chase scene in one of his films, Runaway Train. Django, Predator. Okay. Ocean's 11. A little film called may not have heard of it, Star Wars.
That's a new one for me.
Oh, that's a new one. Okay.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that more in a little in depth. And if you already know Akira Kurosawa, you kind of already know about
probably know why we're talking about Star Wars.
Yeah. So Last Man Standing. And basically every movie.
Is that Bruce Willis?
Yes. That was my favorite one.
The greatest thespian of our generation.
The greatest thespian. And
I actually do love me some Bruce Willis. Give me a little Die Hard any day.
You know what? I went through earlier this summer when I had like some time off. I watched all the Die Hard movies and just like loved it.
That makes me so happy.
I was just like
brings a tear to my eye. I'm so happy.
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfuckers. And I can keep going. Okay. But one thing I wanted to say too, every movie where you've seen a story that's told from a different perspective based on the characters and how it's different based on the story, who's telling it.
Yeah.
Every movie like that. Okay, directors, real quick. I'm just going to run down the big ones. Spielberg, Bergman, Kubrick, Lucas, Herzog, Altman, and a lot more.
You know what's crazy is I was shocked when I was doing my homework. I was shocked at how many of my fucking, heroes consider him the master. When I was seeing like Spielberg and Scorsese and, Oliver Stone, like all of these people, I love their work. And they were considering Kurosawa like he was the master to them.
Yeah. He's been called by some the Beethoven of film directing.
I heard that once or twice.
Yeah, you've heard that. Like, and I think it's a fitting thing because it's so unique and it's so the basis of things. And there's the greats of all time. You can think Bach, Mozart, and things like that. But Beethoven really kind of set standards going forward. We're all building on the shoulders of giants here, but
Mhm.
you can lead to a couple that really kind of made things go forward. But yeah, that's it's an amazing list.
Amazing list, and there's so much we're going to discuss. But before we do, of course, we all need a little background.
All right, here we go. Buckle up. Okay, Akira Kurosawa. He's a Japanese filmmaker. If you didn't know, he was also a painter. He's directed 30 films in a career that spanned over 50 years. He was born in the Omari district of Tokyo in 1920, and he was the eighth and youngest child of a fairly well-off family. I would say probably wealthy. His father was a member of a samurai family, which probably is why when we get on, he made a lot of what he's probably most known for is his samurai films, even though it's less than a third of the movies he made. But we kind of, I think, in the West, kind of see those.
8 or 9, right?
Yeah, I think it was 9. Yeah. He was really interested in Western traditions, and he really liked theater and motion pictures. He was a big fan of Shakespeare, which we'll touch on later. This was led to some criticism by some people in Japan, especially with his work. They thought his films almost had too much of a Western style. So it's kind of funny. But yeah, in 1936, after he did a brief stint as a painter, he joined the film industry where he was an assistant director. And then he found out that he could make more money instead of doing assistant director and by doing screenwriting and scripting. So he did that and said, a lot of this built up to why he was so good at what he did with directing. And also he did a lot of script writing as well in his films over the years. He directed his first film called, and I'm sorry if I mess any of this up, but Shihiro Sugata. It was a martial arts film, and that was his first one, and is basically right around during World War II, and that would later become one of his hallmarks. Like I said, the whole action martial arts and samurai kind of films. He made films all the way until 1993, and he passed away in 1998.
There you go, guys. And here in a minute, we are going to talk shop about the filmography, the craft, the legacy that is Akira Kurosawa. But before we do that, we're going to take a little break. We'll be right back. This episode is brought to you by Novella Adulteration. Follow adult entertainer Jessica Amber Starr as she embarks on a journey that will change her life forever. She not only finds herself in the industry, but figures out a way to transform herself and eventually become reborn. Find out how in Adulteration, which can be found on Amazon in both paperback and ebook. Available now. Now back to the show. All right, Mr. Buck, it's time to do what we do on these kind of shows, these biographical shows, and we're going to talk about the story that is Kurosawa through his work, through his artwork, his art, his craft. Because a lot of people did. I think if you do know that name, people first think that he was only a filmmaker. I mean, he did a little of everything, even editing. Yeah. He would do all of his own storyboards. He was quite the traditional artist at heart too.
Yeah, he was a revolutionary. Like you said, storyboarding was a big thing that he did, which we look at now and we're like, well, a lot of directors do that. Look at, if you watched ever the making of the Phantom Menace, that famous making of where they do the storyboarding for everything, or like a lot of directors today, that's how they.
I think of Cameron when I think of people that still do their own storyboarding.
Oh yeah,
like Aliens and stuff.
Yeah, and even and I know I always bring up Star Wars stuff, but even like Dave Filoni, as he's making the Ahsoka series, he said that he basically animated and broke everything down before he filmed it, so he knew. And he was a direct disciple of Lucas, so he did a lot of that. Also, editing. I want to touch on. He was his own film editor. Akira Kurosawa was, so that helps a lot too. And if you're a really good editor, that's probably half the battle in filmmaking. You can have a great story and a great script and great actors and great performances, but if your editing sucks, then your film sucks. So let's just think like Suicide Squad, the first one. The editing is just very odd, and there's a lot of like
Jesus Christ.
My favorite one, and I can't remember who
I saw that in the theaters, and I was very disappointed by the third act. It's almost like you could see the studio like puppeteering the changes as it went along, and by the third act, it was just a hot mess.
Yeah, I think they brought in editors that mostly edit trailers, and they brought them
That
in.
makes
Yeah,
total sense.
yeah. So anyway, but like that's a big thing. Like again, I'm going to bring up Star Wars. George Lucas, Star Wars was not a great movie until his wife basically edited it. So I mean, she's really the unsung hero of that film. So again, it's very important, and the way Kurosawa would film his films were very much, they all had a purpose and a
So tell us
meaning.
about that purpose. Yeah,
Yeah.
let's hear
So
style, technique.
so his style.
How did he build his visual language?
So he had a lot of pioneering things that he did, and a lot of techniques that he used that were really signature to him. So one of them was a style of cutting in motion, where you have like a scene depicted in two or more shots, and rather than an uninterrupted one. So you might like see somebody move, and then there's a slight cut to another shot where you see like one of the famous ones that you see this is in a lot of movies of his, but it's basically kind of breaking the action into, and what it does is it creates a more emotional effect. We've seen this in a lot of movies, but it really wasn't common 60, 70 years ago in filmmaking. So he really utilized that. Axial cuts, again, in that cutting in motion, where the camera moves closer to or further away from the subject in a series of jump cuts to hide that attention or calling attention to it. He used wipes a lot.
Oh
So
yeah.
again, Star Wars.
On a very, very,
Yeah.
fundamental, try to explain what a wipe is in one sentence.
Yeah.
Just give that to the good people
So
that
when you're
don't know.
transitioning between two scenes, you basically see the screen transition maybe from one end of the screen to another. So
It's like
from left to
literally a
right,
line or a
a
bar,
light or
and
bar.
it literally swipes or wipes the screen.
Or you see like the old timey movies where they have like a circle and it gets bigger, the vignette, you kind of like blows up like that. That's another thing, kind of an early wipe. But yeah, it's just a technique to basically transition from one story point to another. One of the themes that he had too, a lot in his movies were what they call the Yojimbo protagonist, which was Yojimbo was the name of one of his movies. It's a heroic or lone wolf protagonist, and that really was like what built. Obviously, some of the like the Man with No Name, A Fistful of Dollars was directly based off of Yojimbo the movie. But if you think of that Man with No Name character, the lone wolf hero, like a Commando, Snake Plissken, Rambo, John Wick.
And this was like in Yojimbo, it was his OG actor he would use time and time
Yeah.
again. His name was Toshihiro Mifune.
Yes, and he was kind of So I'll touch on this later. He had a couple actors, or actually a handful of actors he used a lot.
Yeah, just like Fincher, uses Pitt, and Scorsese uses
Yes.
DiCaprio. Kurosawa would use Toshihiro.
And he was a master actor. He's a legend in these movies, and he does such a great performance.
And it's crazy to see him do stuff like Yojimbo and then play the opposite kind of role in one of his other films.
Yes, yeah, like he was so dynamic and stuff. So like, it always, we're always focused, being in the West and in the US and on English filmmaking. And of course it's the biggest kind of industry amongst all that. But there's so many great actors out there and over time that don't get as much respect. And Toshiro was definitely one of those guys. So yeah, the main heroic protagonist, also the master and mentor, or in the apprentice, kind of those two roles where you have somebody teaching somebody or passing on their information or being that mentor type character, which we see so much in film over the years, again, like Star Wars or good ones, Karate Kid, the Mr. Miyagi thing. But you see that in a lot of MCU movies. Almost all the MCU movies with a kind of an origin story, they always have that kind of, master or mentor and apprentice kind of roles in there. Also, opening action scenes in films. Prior to him, there wasn't a lot of this. So, and what I mean by open action scenes in films, or think of how many like action movies or things that you've seen where the protagonist is in some sort of he's got some sort of issue and or fight that he gets into that has really no other meaning to the rest of the story. It's just kind of introducing the
just
character.
wallpaper. Yeah,
Yep.
kind of stuff.
Yeah. So, and that was something he really pioneered, and that kind of leads into the violence aspect of it. So, I'm going to start it here. Like you see this in a lot of things. So you see like something like Kill Bill, where you
Yeah.
see like the samurai sword going through
So
and slashing through
clearly
people.
inspired by Kurosawa too.
Kurosawa. So this actually you can and like or Sekiro
Kill
that
Bill 2, that is though, right?
yeah.
It would be
Well, I
Kill
think
Bill 2.
Kill Bill 1 had in that fight with the crazy
Or yeah, just the gratuitous violence.
the gratuitous violence and Kurosawa used violence as kind of to tell a story and used in certain situations why violence might be used for good or things like that, but it's really back to this one scene. So he it all stems from this one scene in this movie called Sanjuro. It defined the use of blood spray in a climatic scene. You see Sanjuro facing off with a gentleman named Hanbei. They're having a very calm, meditative scene, and suddenly Sanjuro pulls a sword out and makes a slash across the body of Hanbei. And there's like a brief second, and then all of a sudden you see this huge jet of blood spraying from his abdomen, and it caught people off guard. Like nobody had seen anything like this. Nobody. They were like, "What the hell?" And some people thought
Now
it
it's
was
kind
like,
of parody, it's used
it's
so
a
much,
parody, yeah, and it's used so much, but everybody kind of copied from that, and it's directly from this one scene. And people thought it was a mistake or a gaffe, but it wasn't. It was supposed to really be. It was meant to be. In fact,
like purposeful.
it was purposeful. Yeah, you see, it's dramatic and shocking, and the interesting fun fact about this is the actor Tatsuya Nakade, who played Hanbei, the jet coming from that spray from the pressurized hose was so strong he had trouble staying on his feet, and you can see it in the scene. He's like kind of shaking and struggling, and it comes off as this brilliant performance, but really the guy was just like trying to like not fall
It was
over.
real.
It's
It
real.
was real.
So it's very cool, and some other things of technique that we'll touch on. Moving on to some other things, Kurosawa used a lot of elements of nature and to tell a story. So you see a lot of these scenes in these films, and in there's always either wind, there's rain, there's smoke,
There's movement. Like
movement,
movement
and
is
movement
the
is the
key
key.
technique.
Movement is the key. You're perfectly right on that. Movement is the key. And there's this famous saying, "Every frame has a painting," and there's actually a YouTube channel called "Every Frame Has a Painting." And they do a really great breakdown of how Kurosawa uses movement. And I tell you what, if you watch his movies, you've never seen anything like that. It really is true. Like every film, and I'm going back to what I said before, every scene, every way it was shot was deliberate. The way he shot things, every shot has a beginning, middle, and end. It tells a story, and a lot of it was with the cinematic framing and movement. So things like using large groups that all have the same reaction to something, to just convey or give you more emotion to something big or important happening to the film. So seeing a group of people kind of with shocked faces turning towards the protagonist, or like a group of people chasing and the number of people being used, or using just a single person, he really planned that out to really convey those movements. If he had an individual person in a scene, they usually had over exaggerated movements. So, for example, if they were really nervous, they would be pacing frantically back and forth. Or if they had a very emotional scene where they were crying, they would dramatically collapse to the floor. I mean, just using a particular person versus a group, you would just see that kind of dynamic, between individual and many people.
Why do you think he was so good at this?
I think it came from a lot from him being a painter and his work on other films, and just kind of really studying, and I think it goes back to that storyboard thing. I think, when you're drawing everything out and you're planning everything like out, especially if you're drawing something, you have to be very dramatic to convey emotion. I almost it's kind of silly, but I always think of storyboarding in films as basically you're drawing out a comic.
Exactly. Oh yeah.
Because that's what you're doing. So you have these really exaggerated, if you think of a comic, if they're really trying to punch somebody or they're feeling really emotion, you see it in their face. You see this over exaggerated look of like anger, despair. And I think that's where that comes from.
I think it comes from when he was developing his skill set, when it was still silent films. Like he had to develop a visual language and a cinematic language to tell the story without any words ever being spoken sometimes. And when he actually could use dialogue and sound like that, it was just another tool in his tool bag. But commonly we could go, there were so many times, and we had to, as people that don't speak Japanese, there was times when I had to get everything just from what was going on the big screen.
Yeah. So one of the cool things about, and kind of leading to that, building off, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but I think it's a good segue to what you just said. One of the things that Every Frame Has a Painting, that YouTube channel really points out, is that if you watch a scene without any context of knowing what you're watching or what the story is so far, Kurosawa, you could see, it would basically tell a story without hearing any dialogue or anything. You knew what was going on. That's what I mean by, like, all the scenes have the beginning, middle, and end. They tell a story, and you see all of that. So he was a master at doing that. And we take that for granted today.
We see that everywhere now. Like, that was the first thing I noticed when we were doing this piece. I was like, how he would block scenes and how he would
Blocking,
build,
yes.
blocking, and how he would build scenes. It seemed, it was strange to see these films in black and white, and I knew that they were made decades and decades ago, but the style was so resonant.
Yeah.
It felt so modern, even though it was made 50 years ago.
And you're right. It's brilliant. Like, when I first got into this, I hadn't, I didn't really know. And people, before I get into deep more, I'm not an expert on film or Kurosawa, but I do have a strong passion, because I got into Kurosawa when I was really kind of in that phase of life where you're young and you're really getting into certain parts of art or music, and really, you kind of dig down into where you see, like, your favorite directors at that time or your favorite musicians, what influenced them. And this was actually suggested to me by my boss at the time, to, like, check out his films. And I watched almost all of them. I couldn't get enough of it, and I was just blown away. Like you said, it just looked so modern. I was like, holy crap, this is amazing. This was made in the 50s. And it feels, it's like listening to Can and
Right.
like realizing what year they made that album.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like 20 years, like it was made
or
20
new
years.
or even craft work to a lesser extent, but definitely
Yeah.
Can. Jesus
Okay.
Christ, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a T-Buck tangent right now of the show. But one other thing I want to point it out too, he asks his actors too to really pick one gesture or movement and repeat it over and over. So before you even, like, could see, like, their face, or you could see them from that movement, it was their signature. You automatically knew who they were.
Yojimbo did this perfectly. If you need, like, a
Yes.
reference point,
Yes, Yojimbo. If you watch, like, I can't remember if it's Yojimbo or Seven Samurai, where he always scratches his shoulder.
I want to say Yojimbo.
Maybe it's Yojimbo. I couldn't remember.
Yeah.
But he does that movement almost every scene, and you're like, what was he doing? And I always thought that
It's
was
almost like a tick.
It's a tick, yeah. And no, he wanted his actors to do that. But kind of going back to the filming, I want to touch on one point, and you see this a lot with Steven Spielberg, a lot of his shots, and it's almost been his signature, but it really, he got it from Kurosawa. And that is these fluid camera moves where you have a close up to the main character, and then it zooms in, you have a full shot, then it zooms in to the main character, and then it does this over the shoulder movement, and then it zooms out again, and it basically conveys an entire story and scene, again going back to that theme, but with a lot of different camera movements, but it's one continuous shot.
I can see Indiana Jones in my head right now.
Okay, yeah, scene. And so I've lined that out, and these are called oneers, and they're basically one shots. Okay, and these became really big in the 40s and 50s, and everybody kind of kept one upping each other. But the people that did it the best, in, like, if you think of Kubrick and, like, Hitchcock and stuff, and even Sam Mendes, the recent version of 1917, which is one, pretty big long shot. But the people who really did it the greatest, like, kept it concise, and Kurosawa is one of these. And that's, the Steven Spielberg doing this in Indiana Jones. So the great example of this is Raiders of the Lost Ark, where Marion, who played by Karen Allen, if you remember when they're getting chased in, I believe it's Cairo, and she gets put in that basket, and you see Indy running down an alley, and all you can hear, you see a basket with two men carrying a basket, you hear her screaming, Indiana Jones, help me, Jones. And then it goes back to his face and he's running down this alley and he comes right up to the camera and there's a full close up of his face. Then he looks puzzled and he starts looking confused and his eyes are darting to left and right of the screen and the audience doesn't know what he's seeing. And then all of a sudden the camera zooms out and pans left over the shoulder and then you see dozens of the same baskets being carried by men who look the same in the square. And then he has to, and you don't know, but it conveys this emotion. Like at first you're like, well, what is he seeing? And then all of a sudden in one fluid shot, you see he is confused. And the audience, it conveys all this emotion and confusion to us because then we see which basket's Marion in. You can't figure it out. So he goes around, starts knocking all of them down to try to figure out where she's at. But that is a great example of what Kurosawa used to do. He did the same shot in Hidden Fortress, almost exactly the same, almost line by line. It's like poetry. It rhymes.
It's like poetry. Yeah, it's a masterclass in visual narrative style because there's what the audience knows, right? You know, in terms of the narrative, and there's usually the audience knows more than the character sometimes. And then there's a narrative device where the characters then sometimes will find out something before the audience does. And when he flips it back and forth like that, it creates drama. It creates drama, and it creates what has now become, we take this word for granted too. This is how we make things cinematic.
And we're in a weird time in cinema history, I think.
Where everything's flat and kind of like there's like no movement. And I'm looking at you, MCU. Yeah, X mob. I had to really think about not saying Twitter mob anymore. I have to say X mob. Come after me, X mob.
God, let's not get. Yeah.
We can do that in our after hours show.
Yeah, we'll do that in our. That's just right. Okay, but that's funny that you're actually thinking that. But
well, we always do bits where like we know we're gonna say something that may be like a little controversial, or we could see like even our close friends being like, "Oh my god, did they fucking say that?" And then we always say something like, "Yeah, come after me, Twitter mob, F you guys, come after me." And now I have to literally pivot to saying X instead of
it's so
Twitter.
Weird. So weird.
It's the everything app. Sure it is.
but I think we're I think we've talked about a lot of things, adding elements of weather, all these different things that just kind of made a signature Kurosawa that we take, like you said, we take for granted now, and we know that's cinematic. Before then, nobody really thought of that. So it's really incredible how much he kind of influenced modern cinema.
We got to talk about his films now then.
Yeah. So we have to move over to, and I'm only going through a handful because Jesus, we could even on one of these films we could do multiple shows on. So I'm going to go through them pretty quick, but I'm just going to do some highlights of, the plots and what made these films important. So, his first one, and he was really known for, those samurai films, but yeah, like I said, there was only like 9 he made, but they're his most famous. So we'll cover a lot of those, but his first one we'll talk about was his first really big post-war film in 1948 called Drunken Angel. It's a noir film. It's set in post-war Japan. Again, it's starring the great Toshiro, and you say it so much better than I do.
Mifune. Toshihiro
Mifune. I can't.
I don't even know if I'm doing the last one right, but that sounds right to me.
Yeah, and he plays Matsunaga, who is a kind of a low crime boss.
Matsunaga.
And Takashi Shimura plays a alcoholic doctor named Sanada. And the reason I'm bringing these two actors up, we've already talked about Toshiro, but Takashi Shimura was also another actor that was basically
another go-to.
Yeah, it was another go-to, and he's also a fantastic actor, and he's kind of the main character in this. But the story is, it's a small-time gangster treated by an alcoholic doctor after a gunfight. He's basically caring for his wounds, and then he figures out that the gangster actually has tuberculosis and diagnoses it with him. And they create this friendship, and he basically convinces this gangster to, kind of take care of his body, stop drinking, stop womanizing, to take care of himself. But when the gangster boss, when he's released from prison, that creates, kind of lowers his boss status, Matasanga's, and he's ostracized, and that leads to a final confrontation with his boss. And so that's kind of the film. But it's really considered one of the great Yakuza films, especially an early one, like post-war. So again, gangster films were really big around this time, sparring from the 30s and 40s. So this is kind of like one of their great gangster films, but it's definitely from Japan. So definitely something to check out if that's you're interested in those old kind of noir gangster
But I
films.
feel like the next one,
Oh yeah,
1950s Rashomon is where
this
I
is where
feel
things
like
get interesting.
he arrived. He
Yes.
got
So
international fame.
oh yeah. So and this one isn't just international, it's like part of the lexicon now of filmmaking. So Rashomon, it's a film that takes place in the high-end area, so the 800s to 1200s Kyoto. It's based off a short story called Inner Grove, but the basic plot is it's about how several people from different backgrounds witness a murder, and each one of those people tells their story, and it's told, it's kind of that theme where if you ask 5 people to describe an event that happened, you'll get 5 totally different stories. And
Mhm.
that's basically what this film is about. It's so that plot device where various characters are providing subjective and alternative versions to the story, all lying in various ways to make them sound better. And at the end, you finally see the real true event that took place. And this is something that has been used in so many different films. It's actually called the Rashomon effect. And
Mm.
it's basically that same plot device as you, like I said, it's been used in television and film so many times. But the fact that this is kind of where that all began from. The other cool thing, and if you watch this, and I'm always amazed when I watch this too, is how light is used. And he wanted to use a lot of natural light. And again, it's going back to nature. A lot of this takes place in a forest. At the beginning of the opening shot, he uses rain that's falling to kind of give that dramatic appearance. And because he wanted the rain and the elements to be so impactful and bring that emotion, they actually tinted the water with ink so it would show up better on film. But with the lighting, they wanted to use a lot of natural light and use sunlight. They couldn't get the right lighting, so they would use mirrors. So it almost looks like the actors are looking directly into the sun. But
Hmm.
the lighting has a lot of, and it's kind of been debated on the symbolism behind the lighting, whether it means good or bad or evil. But there's a lot of debate on, some was everybody in the light was actually basically showing that they're committing a sin or something like that. But some other people have said, no, it's really more about good and evil. But if you watch this film, it almost looks like you see a lot of these light beams and light shafts that go onto the actors, and it really has a big, profound effect. Robert Altman he called it dappled light throughout the film, save it gave the characters ambiguity and a lot of emotion.
Now, Sensei Buck, I was trying to think of like the last film I saw that actually does this, the Rashomon effect. Would you say The Last Duel does this?
Yeah, and that is a very good example of a modern one that has that effect. So again, another Ridley Scott film. But I guarantee I haven't looked into what the influence was, but I guarantee it was probably Rashomon.
There you go.
Um,
What's next?
Next, we'll go to Ikiru. It's 1952 film. It's based off of Leo Tolstoy's The Death of
He loved
Ivan
the
Ilyich.
classics. He loved
He
the
loved the classic.
Shakespeare. He
He
loved
loved Shakespeare.
Dostoevsky.
Yes. So he built. He
He
this
even
is
did The
based off of it.
Idiot. God.
Yeah, and it's about a aging bureaucratic person that has cancer and he's trying to find the meaning of life in his last days. It's got a very interesting 2-part structure of the film, and it bases a lot of the meaning of life and how family structures were changing in post-war Japan and the failing bureaucratic structure in Japan as well. So a lot of analysis has been made on this movie. I don't want to dive too deep on that. You can go in and jump right in. But recently, last year, there was a critically acclaimed film called Living. It was a British film. That's basically, it is a direct remake of Akira. So if you've seen
Hmm.
that, it's the same story, just in a different setting. So very interesting, very good film.
I think we take that for granted too, how many remakes and reboots of a Kurosawa, either
Yes.
story or film, that we didn't realize was a Kurosawa film.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a good point to bring up too. There was a lot of unauthorized remakes that have been
Like A
made.
Fistful of Dollars
Fistful
was
of Dollars,
probably the most famous one.
Magnificent Seven. Yeah, and I will tell you, if you really love Magnificent Seven or Fistful of Dollars, the Akira Kurosawa, and I know this is cliche, but they are better versions. They are better stories. They're more depth. There's more emotion. And I'm not giving away. I love A Fistful of Dollars. I love those
Spaghetti
old spaghetti
westerns.
westerns.
Yeah.
But I mean, they have their place in what they do, and it's just different. All right, we're going to the big one next.
Let's do the GOAT.
This is magnum opus. This is Seven Samurai. The funny story is I tried to get you to watch this with me in college one time, and you're like, yeah, and maybe another time. But
It is, in my defense,
it is a long
3.5 hours.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It is a very long movie.
It's an investment.
It's an investment.
I did rewatch it for the show, and I can see why it's considered the magnum opus. I saw it right. What's crazy is I saw it right after Yojimbo, and I felt like what was crazy to me, the very first thing that I noticed between the two films was how the style was so distinct, and there was continuity between the two, even though the stories were dramatically different. Like Yojimbo was so convoluted, and there was so many backstab. There's so many little different plotting points and stuff like this. Whereas Seven Samurai is very simple.
It's a very simple story. So again, it goes back to the simple story, complex characters. And in this one, if there's, I would say if there's one film that you only can watch of Akira Kurosawa,
this is
the one.
Yeah.
And like Novo said, either go to the bathroom or get some food around you, or break it up into.
Yeah, you can take breaks now.
Nights.
It's on HBO or Max.
It's on Max. Just like several of his films.
Not Twitter. It's X. It's not HBO. It's Max. Even though it's HBO and Twitter.
It's not cable. It's HBO. My favorite one is the Chappelle parody of that, where it's not cable. It's basic cable, bitch. Anyway, okay, it's considered one of the greatest and most influential films in cinematic history. Some say it's the greatest foreign language film
ever, ever.
Some have even pushed it against Citizen Kane. It's a basic plot. It's very simple, as Novo said. It's about a village of farmers who are desperate to combat these bandits who are coming to steal their harvest and all their crops. They're extremely poor. They're starving. They have nothing left. And so they're seeking to hire Ronin to help protecting from this bandits. It's probably the popular, and the real reason why that it may have hit it off with a lot of people is because it's considered to be the pacing and shooting and everything. It seems like a Western film just set in feudal Japan. So that's why probably Magnificent Seven was such a good, and again with Yojimbo was such a good transition for that. It has like a really unorthodox way of filmmaking, and it really is the example of every frame is a painting. Again, that I keep touching on that because it's just brilliant when you watch these. The world building, it feels rich. It feels like you're actually looking at an ancient town or village in feudal Japan. The costume design, everything feels authentic. Like I said, the camera work, the filming was unorthodox. There's a lot of epic battle sequences, and you feel like you're in the middle of the action. And why it was unorthodox for the time was a few reasons. One was Kurosawa's use of telephoto lenses. So basically giving depth to the shot, even though they're relatively flat. And the other thing that he did was he used multiple cameras to shoot these scenes. So at the time, every scene was kind of action scenes were shot by shot. This time he would film part of it, and then he would add second unit camera crews that would film the same thing, because he knew in editing that they couldn't ever recreate like a whole bunch of horses and movements and things like that. So it'd be difficult to edit. So he would do one shot that he would use primarily for editing. Then the second like guerrilla units would go in and kind of film whatever they wanted, and that created that sense of immersion. And so that was really pioneering. Now we see that all the time. Like, if you go to Saving Private Ryan or something, you see the main shots and then the guy following it, the guerrilla shooting where it's on shoulder. You can feel the camera shaking, things like that. Editing was very planned out. This was a very storyboarded film again. So every shot had a purpose, and he used a lot of wipes. So this was another thing that really influenced a lot of directors, was his use of wipes in this film too. There's so much more to this film.
Yeah, we could do a whole episode on just on just
But I got a few
Seven
more,
Samurai.
then, and we're going to go through these quickly because a lot of these are based on stories we already know. So, Throne of Blood, 1957. This was his first Shakespearean adaptation. It's a adaptation of Macbeth. He did 3 films: Bad Sleep Well, which is based off of Hamlet, and then Ron, which we'll talk about later, as our last film in this discussion. It was based off of King Lear. He was a huge fan of, remember we talked about, of Western film and theater. So he always wanted to make this. He actually wanted to make it earlier, but Orson Welles did his version of Hamlet in 1948, so he wanted to delay it a little bit. But it's Macbeth in feudal Japan,
and it's so cool. It's
it
so
is,
cool
oh God,
in
it's
feudal
so
Japan.
Cool. It is so cool, and the sets are amazing. The sets were built on
and the costumes, like everything.
The costumes, everything.
It's crazy.
The special effects for the time are so cool. Like, I was blown away in that spider forest scenes where you see, the ghosts kind of appearing everywhere and like stuff like that. It's in different spots. It's very cool. And one of the coolest parts about this is they actually built the sets on Mount Fuji on the volcanic slopes. And because they were so far from Tokyo, they didn't have a lot of resources, and it was really difficult to build it. He said that they were so exhausted that they were making themselves sick from building this. So fortunately, there was a United States Marine Corps base near where they were filming, and they got assistance from a battalion of Marines, of U.S. Marines, to help build their set.
Alley-oop over here.
Yeah, so for you former Marines out there, that was a pretty cool thing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your service.
It was, but that's a really cool kind of. I always thought like a little piece of
a little
trivia
nugget
there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I talked about special effects. They're really cool for the time. The cool thing is you see a scene where our main character almost gets hit by arrows. And those are real arrows being shot by a very skilled.
I was curious about that. When I was watching this stuff, I was like, how did they do this? I thought it was like the best editing I'd ever seen. So those are real arrows.
Those are arrows being shot
at his head, or like next to his head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By
that would never fly with today's standards.
Nope.
Like the industry would be like, no, we're going to do that in CG. Are you fucking crazy?
Yeah,
we're not using real arrows.
It's amazing.
It looks great on screen. It looks so real.
It looks so real
because it is real.
and again, going back to like the elements that you use, fog is used so much in this, and it creates this air of mysterious and eeriness, and the atmosphere in this film is so cool. So definitely check it out. And then the last two we'll go through. We'll go to this film he did the next year. It's called Hidden Fortress. I'll do a real quick plot of this film. It's about 2 greedy peasants. One's tall, one's short. They go on this adventure where they're basically they go through this big battle where they get attacked by a very large force, and they're chosen to kind of like flee. And then they meet up with a princess, and then they get her rebel general, and they go on a mission to smuggle a very important treasure.
So familiar.
Sounds so familiar. I wonder what film kind of took this plot. And
I would say let's be a little defensive. I wouldn't say took the plot.
No,
inspired
it's
by.
Inspired. It's definitely inspired by. I was going to make a point of that. I'm being facetious.
We're razzing.
But even the great George Lucas has said this was a very heavy influence on Star Wars. It was actually way more. There was a much more influence on the first drafts of it until he changed some things around. But you also see elements. He actually said that Phantom Menace is way more influenced by this as well. So he took elements from that. So definitely, if you love Star Wars fan, check out Hidden Fortress. It's very, very cool to see a film that was that directly inspired, along with the Flash Gordon serials of the film. So very cool.
A piece of pop culture that changed the world forever was Star Wars. And this is how it came to be. So big deal.
And they market it today. If you see it or online, or I remember seeing in a video store, it says the film that inspired Star Wars. They would always put that on there. So
that's smart marketing, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we'll wrap things up. There's so many more, and there's so good ones. And I know I left a few out that might make you cringe, but
Just
again,
leave it in the comments.
we have to move along. But
Smash that
Ron,
like button.
smash that like button. Shout us out.
Or no. Well, we don't
Go
care.
to our Patreon. Give us
Same
money.
show. Yeah.
Novo has an OnlyFans now. No, I'm
Yep.
joking.
It's mostly feet.
It's feet.
My feet. Hey, there's a market for that, okay? So I'm trying to have a sponsor that'll actually pay our hardworking team what they so deserve. But before we do that, let's talk about 1985's Ron.
Yeah, let's just wrap this up with this one. It's based on King Lear.
And the color theory, the bold,
Oh my gosh,
everything had a
blood.
place,
Yes.
everything had a purpose, and it was so vibrant, so rich. It was everything you'd want to be in a colored Kurosawa film.
Remember, we've talked about this with I think it was the Green Knight texture.
Yeah.
Texture on film. This is one of those perfect ones that feels like that. And it's epic. This is his last epic.
Very
and
epic.
It feels epic. And he didn't start filming color till the 70s. So like you said, this is just brilliant in the way the saturation, everything looks amazing. And this film, there's a lot of destruction. You see a lot of property and human destruction in this film, and it's a metaphor, this whole film, and it uses the arquebus, I think is how you say it, the arquebus, which was a early firearm. And you see, and it's basically an early, like prior to the musket, kind of like an early firearm. And at this time in the 16th century Japan, it was being widely used, and it was devastating. And in this film, they show how devastating it was to the samurai and their war practices. And so what it's a metaphor for is actually nuclear warfare, and the anxiety of the post Hiroshima age. Kurosawa, he's been quoted saying that besides all the technological advances in the 20th century, the greatest advance that we made as a human race was the efficiency that we had to kill each other. And so
Jesus.
And so that's why that was the metaphor for this film, is what he said was the advent of the gun coming into warfare and how devastating it was. So very good film. Check it out. And like you said, the color is just amazing in this.
Oh, the color theory. And I mean, honestly, check out all of his films, and you will get a new appreciation for cinema. So let's tie a bow on this B and tell the good people why. Why should they study the career, the works, the legacy that is Akira Kurosawa?
So I think with this whole discussion, we've been talking about all these influences that he had and what we take for granted in modern cinema. So he is the greatest, if not the greatest, in my opinion,
ever.
Ever.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. And
the greatest director that has ever lived of all time, period.
He might be. And that some people will jump up and down about that and say, no, you can't say that.
It is subjective, right?
Subjective.
You may have a different opinion, but it's crazy to me that all of the greats, all of them look up to this guy.
Yeah. So if you're a fan of film, and you probably already know who he is, but if you haven't explored Kurosawa, or you just want to take a deeper dive into one of the greatest innovators of the art, his work is something that we should really treasure.
And there you have it, folks. The legacy, the works, the art that is Akira Kurosawa from top to bottom. I want to thank you guys for listening. I want to thank my guest, Mr. Theodore T. Buck, my favorite samurai, for joining us today and leading us through this journey, this ever cascading movement of missions to get us to the finish line. And here we are. But before we go, of course, we got a little extra for you, a little cherry on top with what we call the gem of the week. Before we talk gems, let's talk their sponsors. Today's gems are brought to you by Zencastr. Zencastr is our go-to tool for remote podcast recording. So what's great is that you can record separate audio and video tracks, and it's all backed up on a secured cloud, so you never lose your hard work. Even better, it's easy to use, and there's nothing to download. So go to zen.ai, that's zen.ai/Art of the Beholder, or just use promo code Art of the Beholder and get 30% off your first 3 months with the Pro account. Now back to the gems. I'm going to keep mine short and sweet so we can pass it back to our guest. And that is, I want to talk about some other amazing imports from Japan. I would say literally anything from Studio Ghibli. So that's the animation studio behind things like Spirited Away or Princess Mononoke.
I just have a random one here. I've been listening to Sundial by No Name, her new album. And if you don't know who No Name is, she's a rapper, poet.
Check it out, guys. Love it. If you like that, you can always check out some of our stuff at novadayproductions.com. You can, of course, follow us at _Novo_day, and day is DE, and at Novaday Media. Don't forget to like, subscribe, do all the things. If you'd like to sponsor our little love child or be on the show, you can reach out to us at novadaymedia@gmail.com. So until next time, you know what to do. Be good to each other, and we'll see you in the next one. So as always, good luck and Godspeed. We love you.
Art of the Beholder is brought to you by Novo Day Productions. Created and hosted by Novo Day and the Novo Day Collective. Facebook.com/Novo Day Media, at Novo Day Media on Twitter and Instagram. Music by A Company. Facebook.com/ACO Music 123. ACO on Spotify. Logo design by Tom Justice, JESTUS, of thejusticecompany.com. And executively produced by Clayton Anderson. All rights reserved.
Yippee ki motherfuckers.